The blood-red sunrise painted the Wyoming sky as Forrest Valero rode into Fort Collins with shadows in his eyes deeper than the canyons he'd traversed. Dust clung to his trail-worn clothes, the leather of his saddle creaking with each step of his exhausted buckskin horse. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, stopping only when absolutely necessary, as if the devil himself was on his heels. In truth, what chased him was far worse memories that wouldn't die, no matter how much distance he put between himself and his past. It was 1876, a time when the West was still wild and untamed, when a man could reinvent himself if he rode far enough. But Forrest had learned the hard way that some things couldn't be outrun. He guided his horse down the main street, taking in the sights of the growing settlement. Fort Collins was newer than some frontier towns, established as a military outpost not too long ago, but already showing signs of permanence with its wooden buildings, general store, and saloon. Forrest needed a drink, a meal, and a bed in that order. The Silver Dollar Saloon beckoned with its painted wooden sign swinging gently in the morning breeze. Forrest dismounted, his boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. He winced at the stiffness in his joints, a reminder of too many nights spent sleeping on hard ground. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured to his horse, patting the animal's neck before tying him to the hitching post. "We'll get you some water and oats soon." Inside, the saloon was quiet, only a few early patrons nursing drinks or playing cards. A thin man with spectacles was wiping down the bar, glancing up as Forrest entered. "Morning, stranger," the barkeep said. "You look like you could use some refreshment." Forrest nodded, approaching the bar. "Whiskey and information about work." The barkeep poured a generous measure of amber liquid into a glass. "What kind of work you looking for? Anything involving horses? I'm good with them." It was the one truth Forrest could offer without reservation. As Forrest drank, the barkeep studied him. "Name's Philip. And you might be in luck. Fletcher's ranch about 5 miles north of town lost a few hands recently. Word is they're hiring." "Much obliged," Forrest said, laying a coin on the counter. He wasn't planning to stay long, never did, but he needed money before moving on. "You got a name, mister?" Philip asked. Forrest hesitated. "Valero, Forrest Valero." "Well, Mr. Valero, if you're heading to Fletcher's, you might want to speak with his daughter first. She's been handling most of the ranch business since the old man took ill. Usually comes to town on Fridays for supplies." "Today's Friday," Forrest observed. "That it is," Philip confirmed with a slight smile. "She'll likely be at Norton's general store before noon." Forrest finished his drink, savoring the burn that momentarily distracted him from his other pains, both physical and those buried deeper. He'd find this Fletcher daughter, secure some work, earn enough money to keep moving. That was his pattern now. Never staying, never connecting, never risking anyone discovering what he'd done. After seeing to Thunder's needs at the livery stable, Forrest made his way to Norton's general store. He didn't have to wait long. She entered with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world, tall and straight-backed, dressed practically in a riding skirt and jacket. Her chestnut hair was pulled back, revealing a face that bore the healthy glow of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. But it was her eyes that caught Forrest's attention, intelligent, sharp, and the color of the sky just after sunset. "Morning, Mrs. Norton," she called to the woman behind the counter. "I've got the list from Father." "Good morning, Miss Natalie. How is Mr. Fletcher doing today?" Mrs. Norton asked, accepting the piece of paper. "About the same, thank you for asking. The doctor says rest is what he needs most." Forrest approached, removing his hat. "Excuse me, Miss Fletcher. I heard you might be looking for ranch hands. Those twilight blue eyes turned to him, assessing him with a single glance that seemed to take in every detail of his appearance. "And you are Forrest Valero, madam. I've worked with horses most of my life." "Have you now?" She didn't sound impressed. "And what brings you to Fort Collins, Mr. Valero?" "Just passing through," he said, the familiar lie coming easily. "Looking for honest work." "Just passing through," she repeated, something knowing in her tone. "Like all the others. Tell me, Mr. Valero, why should I hire a man who's already planning to leave?" Her directness caught him off guard. Most people didn't challenge the polite fictions that kept the wheels of society turning. "Because until I leave, I'll work harder than two men," he said simply. "And I know horses better than most." Natalie Norton, for that was her full name, he later learned, studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "We're short-handed with roundup coming. Can you start today?" "Yes, madam." "Good. Finish whatever business you have in town and meet me at the livery in an hour. The ranch is 5 miles north. I won't wait if you're late." With that, she turned back to Mrs. Norton to continue with her shopping, effectively dismissing him. Forrest replaced his hat and stepped outside, unsure whether to be amused or annoyed by her brusque manner. Either way, he had work, which meant food and a place to sleep for at least a while. True to her word, Natalie Norton was mounted and ready at the livery exactly 1 hour later. She sat astride a magnificent sorrel mare, watching as Forrest saddled Thunder. "That's a fine horse," she commented, the first hint of warmth in her voice. "Mustang stock, part Mustang, part quarter horse," Forrest replied, pleased she had noticed. "Caught him wild in Arizona territory 3 years ago. We've been together ever since." "You broke him yourself," Forrest nodded, tightening the cinch. "I don't break horses, Miss Norton. I gentle them." Something shifted in her expression, interest, perhaps, or the first glimmer of respect. "Well, let's see if your methods work as well with our stock. We have a string of broncs that need training before they can be sold." The ride to Norton Ranch gave Forrest time to appreciate the landscape. The rolling plains stretched toward distant mountains, the grass still green from spring rains. It was beautiful country, the kind that could make a man think about putting down roots if that man weren't Forrest Valero. Natalie rode slightly ahead, her posture perfect, occasionally pointing out landmarks or property boundaries. "We run about 2,000 head of cattle," she explained, "but horses are our specialty. Father started breeding quarter horses for speed and cow sense 15 years ago. We've developed quite a reputation." "Your father is ill, I heard," Forrest ventured. A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, his heart isn't what it used to be. The doctor says he shouldn't exert himself, which means I've taken on most of the ranch operations. That's a lot of responsibility." "I've been preparing for it my whole life," she said simply. "I'm an only child, Mr. Valero. This ranch will be mine someday, and I intend to make sure it thrives." They crested a small rise, and the ranch spread before them, a large main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, bunkhouse, corrals, and various outbuildings. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's impressive," Forrest said honestly. "It's home," Natalie replied, a touch of pride in her voice. "Come, I'll show you where you'll be staying and introduce you to the foreman." The bunkhouse was clean and well-maintained, with 8 bunks, though currently only 4 were occupied by other ranch hands. The foreman, a weathered man named Edgar Simmons, shook Forrest's hand with a grip that spoke of years of hard work. "Miss Natalie says you know horses," Edgar said, eyeing Forrest critically. "I do." "Good, 'cause we got 16 broncs that need gentling before the fall horse sale. You mess up even one and you're gone. Clear, crystal," Forrest replied, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "He'll start tomorrow with the sorrel colt," Natalie interjected. "I want to see his methods for myself." Edgar nodded. "Yes, madam, that colt's been giving us fits. If he can handle that one, he can handle any of them." After settling into the bunkhouse and meeting the other hands, a friendly giant named Lars, taciturn brothers Ben and Samuel, and a young Mexican vaquero called Miguel Forrest joined them for dinner in the cookhouse. The cook, an elderly woman named Mrs. Wilkins, served up hearty portions of beef stew and fresh bread, eyeing Forrest with open curiosity. "Another drifter," she commented, not unkindly. "You planning to stay the season at least?" Forrest accepted the bowl with thanks. "Depends on how tomorrow goes, I reckon." "Ah, the sorrel devil," Lars chuckled. "Miss Natalie's testing you with that one. Threw me twice last week." "Nearly broke Samuel's arm," Ben added, gesturing to his brother's bandaged limb. "He's spirited," Samuel corrected. "Just needs the right touch." Miguel nodded. "El Diablo Rojo, we call him. Be careful, amigo." Forrest ate in thoughtful silence. He hadn't expected to be tested so immediately, but perhaps it was for the best. Success would secure his position. Failure would simply mean moving on sooner than planned. Either way, the outcome didn't matter much in the grand scheme of his life. After dinner, while the others played cards, Forrest stepped outside to check on Thunder and breathe in the cool evening air. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky, countless points of light that had guided him across deserts and mountains. He was contemplating the constellations when he sensed someone approach. "Beautiful night," Natalie said, standing several feet away, her face tilted toward the heavens. "Yes, madam," Forrest agreed, surprised by her presence. "You don't have to call me madam. Natalie is fine when we're not working." Forrest nodded but didn't comment. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Valero?" she asked after a moment. "Texas," he answered, offering no more. "And what made you leave?" Forrest tensed. "Nothing worth talking about." Natalie turned to study him, her expression softening slightly in the gathering darkness. "Everyone out here is running from something, Mr. Valero. The question is whether they're running from others or from themselves." Her perception unsettled him. "With all due respect, my past is my own business." "Fair enough," she conceded. "But I need to know if your past is going to cause problems for my ranch. We've had men bring trouble before." "No trouble will follow me," Forrest assured her, though in his heart he knew trouble was always with him, carried in his memories. Natalie seemed to accept this, at least for now. "The sorrel colt tomorrow, he's special. My father bred him from our best stock. He has potential to be a champion cutting horse if properly trained." "Is that why you're giving him to me?" "As a test." "Yes," she admitted frankly. "I want to see if you're as good with horses as you claim." Forrest appreciated her honesty. "I won't disappoint you. We'll see." She turned to go, then paused. "Good night, Mr. Valero." "Good night, Miss Norton." As he watched her walk toward the main house, Forrest felt an unexpected pang of something. Not quite regret, not quite longing, but something in between. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself to feel anything beyond the constant guilt and need to keep moving. He pushed the feeling away, reminding himself that Norton Ranch was just another temporary stop on an endless journey. Dawn came early at the ranch. Forrest was already awake when the other men began stirring, having slept fitfully as he often did. After a quick breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and coffee, he followed Edgar to the corral where the infamous sorrel colt waited. The horse was magnificent young, but already showing the muscled build of a quality quarter horse, with a deep chest and powerful hindquarters. His coat gleamed like burnished copper in the morning light, and his eyes held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. "There he is," Edgar said. "Flame is what Miss Natalie calls him, though Hellion might be more fitting." Forrest noted the small audience gathering, the other ranch hands, Mrs. Wilkins and Natalie herself, standing at the corral fence with arms folded across her chest. No pressure then. "I'll need some time with him before attempting to ride," Forrest explained, removing his hat and jacket and rolling up his sleeves. "And I'd prefer to work alone." Edgar raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Your funeral, Cowboy." As the foreman stepped away, Natalie approached. "What's your plan?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "First, to let him get used to me," Forrest explained, meeting her gaze. "A horse needs to trust before he'll accept a rider. Trust takes time. We don't have unlimited time before the sale. I understand, but rushing will only set him back further." Forrest paused, then added, "If you want quality work, Miss Norton, you need to allow for proper methods." Their eyes held for a long moment before she nodded once. "Very well. Show me these methods of yours." Forrest entered the corral slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and his body language non-threatening. Flame snorted and trotted to the far side, watching the human intruder with suspicious eyes. For the next hour, Forrest simply existed in the same space as the horse, occasionally talking softly but making no attempt to approach. Gradually, Flame's curiosity began to overcome his wariness. The colt would take a few steps closer, then dart away when Forrest moved, only to approach again later. By mid-morning, Flame was allowing Forrest to stand relatively near without bolting. By noon, Forrest was able to extend his hand for the horse to sniff. And by late afternoon, he was running his hands gently over the colt's neck and shoulders, murmuring soft words of praise. The spectators had long since dispersed to their other duties, but Natalie returned periodically to check on progress. When Forrest finally exited the corral at dusk, she was waiting. "You didn't try to ride him," she observed. "No," Forrest agreed, wiping sweat from his brow. "That comes later. Today was about establishing trust." "And did you?" "The beginnings of it," he said. "These things can't be rushed." To his surprise, Natalie smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "You're right, of course. I've always believed in gentling rather than breaking, but few of our hands have the patience for it." "It's worth the extra time," Forrest insisted. "A horse that trusts you will give you everything he has. One that fears you will always hold something back." Something in his words seemed to resonate with her. "Have dinner at the house tonight, Mr. Valero. Father would like to meet the man who spent an entire day just letting a horse get used to him." Forrest's instinct was to refuse. Getting close to people wasn't part of his plan, but curiosity about the elder Norton overrode his caution. "I'd be honored." After washing up and changing into his cleanest shirt, Forrest made his way to the main house. It was larger than it had appeared from a distance, built of solid logs with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Natalie met him at the door, wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. "Come in," she said, leading him into a comfortable sitting room where an older man sat in a leather armchair near the fireplace. Though thinner than he must have been in his prime, Harold Norton still projected strength, with the same direct gaze as his daughter. "So you're the horse whisperer my Natalie's been telling me about," Harold said, extending a hand. His grip was firm despite his illness. "Just a man who respects horses, sir," Forrest replied. "Sit, sit," Harold gestured to a nearby chair. "Natalie says you spent all day just letting Flame get to know you. Most men would have been determined to be on his back by sundown." "Most men would have been thrown off his back by sundown," Forrest countered with a slight smile. Harold laughed, a rich sound that ended in a small cough. "True enough. That colt has spirit. His dam was the same. Took me 3 weeks to gentle her properly." They talked horses through dinner, served by Mrs. Wilkins, who apparently divided her time between the cookhouse and the main residence. Forrest found himself relaxing despite his usual guardedness, drawn in by Harold's obvious knowledge and Natalie's intelligent questions. "Where did you learn your methods?" Natalie asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "From an old vaquero in South Texas," Forrest said, the memory bittersweet. "Manuel Diaz. He could gentle the wildest Mustang with just patience and understanding." "You speak as if he's gone," Harold observed quietly. Forrest nodded, his eyes dropping to his plate. "5 years now." "I'm sorry for your loss," Natalie said softly. Forrest merely nodded again, unwilling to elaborate on how Manuel had died or the role Forrest had played in the tragedy. The guilt rose like bile in his throat, threatening to choke him as it often did when memories surfaced. Perhaps sensing his discomfort, Harold changed the subject to the upcoming horse sale, but the easy atmosphere of earlier had dissipated. After dinner, Forrest thanked them for their hospitality and excused himself, claiming an early start in the morning. Natalie walked him to the door. "You went somewhere else for a moment there," she observed. "When we mentioned your mentor." Forrest met her gaze, struck again by her perceptiveness. "Old memories, not all of them pleasant." "If you ever want to talk about it, I don't," he cut her off, more sharply than intended. Seeing her expression, he softened his tone. "But thank you for the offer." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good night, Mr. Valero." "Good night, Miss Norton." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Forrest spent mornings with Flame, gradually introducing a saddle blanket, then a saddle, speaking constantly in low, soothing tones. Each afternoon he worked with other horses or helped with general ranch duties. The other hands began to accept him, particularly after seeing his progress with the sorrel colt. On the 5th day, with Flame now accepting the saddle without protest, Forrest decided it was time for the next step. A small crowd again gathered at the corral, including Natalie and, surprisingly, Harold, who watched from a chair that had been carried out for him. "Today's the day?" Edgar asked, leaning on the fence. "If he's willing," Forrest replied. Flame stood quietly as Forrest approached, lowering his head for the halter, now a familiar routine. After saddling him, Forrest spent several minutes running his hands over the colt's body, murmuring reassurances. Then, with deliberate slowness, he put a foot in the stirrup and eased some weight onto the saddle. Flame tensed but didn't bolt. Encouraged, Forrest slowly swung his other leg over and settled gently into the saddle, keeping the reins loose. For a moment, horse and rider were still, a tableau of perfect trust. Then Flame took a tentative step, then another. Forrest made no demands, allowing the horse to become accustomed to the weight on his back. Soon they were walking around the corral, Flame responding to the lightest pressure of Forrest's legs. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the watchers. Forrest patted Flame's neck, murmuring praise, then guided him to where Natalie and Harold waited. "Magnificent," Harold said, his eyes bright with appreciation. "I haven't seen such gentle handling since my own father taught me." "He's a smart horse," Forrest said, dismounting smoothly. "Wants to please once he understands what's asked of him." "Just like people," Natalie remarked, reaching out to stroke Flame's velvet nose. Harold struggled to his feet, waving away his daughter's assistance. "Mr. Valero, I'd like to speak with you privately if you don't mind. Join me for a drink on the porch." Curious, Forrest agreed after ensuring Flame was properly unsaddled and turned out into the corral. He followed Harold to the house, where they settled in chairs on the shaded porch. Natalie brought a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, then tactfully excused herself. "Remarkable girl, my Natalie," Harold said, watching her go. Has the strength of her mother and twice the determination. She runs the ranch well, Forrest observed. That she does, Harold agreed, pouring whiskey for both of them. But it's a heavy burden for someone so young. She's only 24, you know. Should be thinking about a husband and family, not worrying about cattle prices and horse training. Forrest accepted the offered glass, but remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. Harold took a slow sip of his drink. I'm not going to recover, Mr. Valero. The doctor tries to be optimistic, but I know my own body. Another few months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. No need for sorrow. I've lived a good life. Harold fixed Forrest with a penetrating stare. But I worry about Natalie. She'll inherit everything, and while she's more than capable, this is still rough country for a woman alone. Forrest tensed, suddenly understanding. Mr. Norton, if you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything yet, Harold interrupted with a wry smile. Just thinking aloud. You have a gift with horses, Mr. Valero. The ranch needs someone like you, especially with the breeding program I've spent years developing. I'm not staying, Forrest said quietly but firmly. I told Miss Norton from the start that I was just passing through. Yes, she mentioned that. Harold didn't seem deterred. The question is why. A man with your skills could do well here, unless there's something driving you onward. The question hit too close to home. Forrest drained his glass, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. There are things in my past that can't be undone, Mr. Norton. Mistakes that can't be fixed. It's better if I keep moving. Every man has regrets, Harold said gently. The measure of a man isn't in avoiding mistakes, but in how he carries them afterward. Some burdens shouldn't be shared, Forrest replied, thinking of Natalie's clear eyes and direct gaze. She deserved better than a man haunted by his past. Harold studied him for a long moment before nodding. Fair enough, but my offer stands. There's a permanent place for you here if you want it. Thank you, sir. I'll consider it. But Forrest had no intention of considering it. As soon as Flame was fully trained and the horse sale concluded, he would collect his pay and move on, just as he always did. Norton Ranch was too dangerous, not because of any external threat, but because of the feelings beginning to stir within him whenever Natalie was near. The next few weeks passed quickly, filled with hard work from dawn to dusk. Flame progressed rapidly under Forrest's guidance, soon accepting a bit and responding to rein commands. Other horses were assigned to him as word of his skills spread, and even Edgar began to defer to his judgment in training matters. Natalie was a constant presence, observing his methods and occasionally offering insights of her own. She was knowledgeable about horses in a way few women or men were, understanding the subtleties of breeding and training that made the difference between a good horse and a great one. Despite his determination to maintain distance, Forrest found himself drawn into conversations with her that stretched beyond horses to books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they'd harbored. She was well educated, having attended a ladies' seminary in Denver, but preferred the freedom of ranch life to city constraints. Father wanted me to find a husband there, she confided one evening as they walked back from checking on a mare about to foal. Someone suitable who would take care of the ranch and me. And you didn't want that? Forrest asked, though he already knew the answer. I didn't want to be taken care of, she said with a hint of fire in her voice. I wanted a partnership. Someone who would stand beside me, not in front of me. Their eyes met in the gathering twilight, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Forrest was the first to look away. Your father's a good man, he said, changing the subject. He respects your abilities. Yes, she agreed. Though lately he's become fixated on finding me a husband before he. She trailed off, unable to say the words. He worries about you. I know. but I've been running this ranch practically on my own for 2 years. I don't need a husband to continue doing so." Forrest hesitated, then said quietly, "Perhaps he wants you to have someone to share the burden with. Not because you can't carry it, but because no one should have to carry everything alone." Natalie stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Is that what you do, Forrest? Carry your burdens alone?" It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it affected him more than he cared to admit. "My burdens are my own," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "That doesn't answer my question." "Yes," he conceded. "I carry them alone. It's better that way." "Better for whom?" The challenge in her voice made him bristle. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," she pressed, stepping closer. "What is it that you're running from? What guilt weighs so heavily that you can't stay in one place?" "Leave it alone, Natalie," he warned. "No," her eyes held his, unflinching. "I've seen how you look sometimes, like you're carrying the weight of the world. Whatever it is, it's eating you alive." "And what would you have me do?" he demanded, anger and pain breaking through his careful control. "Share it? Spread my guilt around like a disease?" "Yes," she said simply. "That's exactly what I would have you do." Her unexpected answer stopped him cold. They stood facing each other in the deepening darkness, the tension between them palpable. "You can't save me," Forrest said finally, his voice low. "I'm not trying to save you," she replied. "I'm offering to help you save yourself." Before he could respond, a shout came from the direction of the barn the mare was foaling, and there were complications. The moment shattered as they both ran toward the sound, personal revelations forgotten in the immediate crisis. The night was long and difficult. The mare was struggling, the foal positioned wrong. Forrest worked alongside Natalie and Edgar, his strong hands gentle as they tried to turn the foal in the womb. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his forearms bloody, but he never faltered, murmuring encouragement to the distressed mare. Dawn was breaking when the foal finally emerged, wet and seemingly lifeless. Natalie made a small sound of distress, but Forrest wasn't ready to give up. He cleared the foal's nostrils and mouth, then rubbed its chest vigorously. For agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the tiny body shuddered, and the foal drew its first breath. "You did it," Natalie whispered, her face alight with wonder as the newborn struggled to lift its head. "We did it," Forrest corrected, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. They stayed to ensure both mare and foal were stable, then stumbled out of the barn into the fresh morning air. Edgar headed to the bunkhouse to get some rest before the day's work began, leaving Forrest and Natalie alone. "Thank you," she said, impulsively touching his arm. "Your experience saved them both." Forrest looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face smudged with dirt and glowing with relief. In that moment, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and the wall he'd built around his heart developed a dangerous crack. "I've seen a lot of foalings," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Some good, some bad. You learn to recognize the signs." "Where did you learn so much about horses?" she asked, removing her hand but staying close. Forrest hesitated, then decided that after the night they'd shared, he owed her at least a partial truth. "My family had a small horse ranch in Texas, and later I worked with Manuel Diaz, as I mentioned before. The vaquero who taught you gentling." "Yes." Forrest's throat tightened. "He was like a father to me after my own parents died." Natalie was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "What happened to him, Forrest?" The question hung in the air between them, an invitation to unburden himself. For an instant, Forrest was so tempted to tell her everything. But habit and fear won out. "It's a long story," he said finally, "and we both need sleep." Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. "Another time, perhaps." Perhaps, he echoed, though he knew the time would never come. In a few short weeks, the horse sale would be over and he would ride away, just as he always did. But as he headed toward the bunkhouse, Forrest found himself wondering for the first time in years what it might be like to stay. The following days brought a subtle change in their interactions. Natalie no longer pressed for his secrets, but her quiet acceptance was almost more unsettling than her questions had been. She worked alongside him often, their hands occasionally brushing as they adjusted a saddle or examined a horse's hoof. Each contact sent an unwelcome jolt through Forrest's body, a reminder of feelings he'd thought long dead. 2 weeks before the horse sale, Harold's condition worsened. The doctor was summoned from town, and the atmosphere at the ranch grew tense. Forrest threw himself into his work, training horses from dawn until dusk as if physical exhaustion might dull the emotional turmoil within. One evening, as he was checking on Flame one last time before turning in, Natalie found him in the stable. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, her posture rigid with the effort of maintaining control. "Father is asking for you," she said simply. Surprised, Forrest nodded. "I'll come right away." He followed her to the main house, where the doctor was just leaving. The man's grave expression told its own story. "How long?" Forrest asked quietly as they passed each other on the porch. "Days, maybe a week," the doctor replied with a shake of his head. "His heart is failing. I've given him medicine for the pain, but there's little else to be done." Inside, Harold's bedroom was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of illness and medicine. The older man looked shrunken against the pillows, his once robust frame now thin and frail. But his eyes were clear as they fixed on Forrest. "Ah, the horse whisperer," Harold said, his voice weak but warm. "Come sit with me a while. Natalie, give us a few minutes, would you, my dear?" She hesitated, glancing between them, then nodded and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Forrest sat in the chair beside the bed, uncomfortable with both the setting and the probable reason for this private conversation. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yes." Harold struggled to sit up straighter, waving away Forrest's attempt to help. "I'm dying, Mr. Valero." "No need to dance around it." "I'm sorry, sir." "No need for that either. I've had a good run." Harold's gaze was penetrating despite his weakness. "But I'm worried about Natalie." Forrest tensed, anticipating what was coming. "Not because she can't handle the ranch," Harold continued. "She can and will, but because she'll be alone. There are men in this territory who will try to take advantage suitors after her land rather than her heart, neighbors who will think they can encroach on a woman's property." "She's strong," Forrest said, "and respected in the community." "Yes, she is, but strength alone isn't always enough." Harold paused, collecting his thoughts. "I've watched you these past weeks, Forrest. You're a good man, despite whatever shadows you're carrying." Forrest started to protest, but Harold raised a hand to silence him. "I'm not asking you to marry her, though God knows that would ease my mind considerably. I'm asking you to stay on, at least for a while after I'm gone. She trusts you, though she'd never admit it, and she'll need someone she can trust in the days ahead." The request caught Forrest off guard. He'd been prepared to refuse a deathbed matchmaking attempt, but this was different and harder to decline. "Mr. Norton, I know. You're just passing through," Harold interrupted with a weak smile. "But I'm offering you a home, Forrest. A place where your skills are valued, where you could build something lasting. Whatever you're running from, is it worth giving up the chance for peace?" The question struck Forrest like a physical blow. Peace was something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for in years, convinced it was beyond his reach. "I don't know if I can," he admitted finally, "but I'll stay until after the sale, make sure things are running smoothly." Harold nodded, seeming to understand this was the most Forrest could promise. Fair enough. That's a start. He closed his eyes, clearly exhausted by the conversation. Send Natalie back in, would you? Forrest stood, hesitated, then impulsively reached out to grasp the older man's hand. You built something special here, sir. She'll honor that legacy. Harold squeezed his hand weakly. I know she will. I just don't want her to face it alone. As Forrest left the room, his mind was in turmoil. He found Natalie waiting in the hallway, her face composed but vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. He's asking for you, Forrest said gently. He's tired but lucid. She nodded, then surprised him by touching his arm. Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to him. Forrest covered her hand with his own before he could think better of it. I'm sorry, Natalie. He's a good man. The best, she agreed, her voice thick with unshed tears. I don't know how to do this without him. Yes, you do, Forrest assured her, unexpected conviction in his tone. You've been doing it already, and you won't be alone. She looked up at him, hope flickering briefly in her eyes. Won't I? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Forrest knew he should step back, maintain distance, but instead found himself saying, I promised your father I'd stay through the sale and help get things settled afterward. It wasn't what she was asking, and they both knew it, but it was all he could offer right now. After a moment, she nodded. Thank you, she said simply, then squared her shoulders and entered her father's room, closing the door behind her. Forrest stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling as if he stood at a crossroads, with all possible paths fraught with uncertainty. Harold Norton died peacefully 3 days later, with Natalie holding his hand and Forrest standing just outside the door, having been summoned too late for final words. The funeral was held the following day, attended by nearly everyone in Fort Collins and surrounding ranches. Natalie stood dry-eyed and straight-backed as her father was laid to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch he'd built, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. Forrest stayed in the background, watchful but unobtrusive. He noted which neighbors seemed genuinely sorrowful, and which eyed the young woman speculatively, already calculating advantages. His protective instincts surprised him with their intensity. That evening, after the last guests had departed, Forrest found Natalie sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. Without invitation, he sat in the chair beside her, offering a glass of whiskey. Your father's best, he said as she accepted it. Seemed appropriate. Natalie took a small sip, then another larger one. Thank you, for this and for today, for making sure everything ran smoothly. You did the hard part, Forrest observed. You stood strong. I didn't feel strong, she admitted, the first crack in her composure. I felt hollow. Like the wind could blow right through me. That's grief, Forrest said quietly, memories of his own losses surfacing. It changes shape over time but never really leaves. She glanced at him. You speak from experience. Yes. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping whiskey and watching the stars emerge. Finally, Natalie spoke again. What did he ask you, Forrest? That day in his room, Forrest considered evading the question but decided on honesty. He asked me to stay, at least for a while. To help you through the transition. And what did you say? That I would stay until after the sale and make sure things were running smoothly. Natalie nodded, absorbing this. And then? I don't know, Forrest admitted. For the first time in years, his next move wasn't clear in his mind. The familiar urge to run was still there, but competing with it was something new, a pull toward this place, this woman. What are you afraid of? She asked softly, echoing her question from weeks before, but now without challenge, just genuine curiosity. Forrest stared into his glass, the amber liquid catching the last light of day. Staying in one place means people start to know you, really know you, and once they do, they might not like what they see, Natalie guessed. They might get hurt because of me, he corrected, the words escaping before he could stop them. Natalie turned to face him fully. What happened, Forrest? What happened to make you believe that? The question hung in the air between them. Forrest took a long swallow of whiskey, feeling it burn down his throat. For 5 years, he had carried his story alone, letting it fester like a wound that wouldn't heal. Maybe it was the setting sun, or the funeral, or simply exhaustion, but suddenly the words were there, demanding to be spoken. I killed him, Forrest said, his voice barely audible. Manuel, the man who taught me everything about horses, who was like a father to me, he died because of me. Natalie's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Tell me, she said simply, and so he did. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush as he described how he'd come to work for Manuel Diaz after his parents' deaths, learning the old vaquero's horse gentling methods and being treated like a son. How they'd built a small but respected horse training business in South Texas. How they'd been approached by a wealthy rancher named Blackburn who wanted them to train his prized stallion, a magnificent but temperamental animal that had injured 2 previous trainers. Manuel was cautious, Forrest continued, staring into the distance. Said the horse had fear in his eyes, not meanness. We should take our time, he said. But I was younger then, more arrogant. I thought I knew better, thought I could gentle that stallion faster if I pushed a little harder. What happened? Natalie asked when he fell silent. I took the stallion out alone one day when Manuel was in town. Thought I'd make some real progress, show him what I could do. Forrest's voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if reciting facts about a stranger. The horse spooked at something, a snake maybe, I never saw, and bolted. I lost control, we crashed through a fence. I was thrown clear, but the horse was panicking, tangled in wire. He swallowed hard, the memories as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. Manuel heard the commotion, came running. He tried to calm the stallion, get him free before he injured himself worse. But the horse was beyond reasoning, thrashing wildly. One kick caught Manuel in the head. Forrest closed his eyes. He died instantly. Natalie's hand found his in the gathering darkness, her fingers warm against his cold ones. It was an accident, Forrest. An accident I caused, he corrected harshly. If I'd listened to him, if I hadn't been so damn sure of myself. You made a mistake, she said quietly. A terrible one with tragic consequences, but it wasn't murder. Tell that to Manuel's widow, Forrest said bitterly. Or his son, who was only 12. They lost everything. Manuel was the breadwinner, and Blackburn blamed them for the death of his horse. Refused to pay what he owed, said we'd breached contract by mishandling his property. What did you do? Gave them everything I had, which wasn't much. Promised to send more. Forrest's laugh was hollow. I've been working ranch to ranch ever since, sending half my wages to Alina and Miguel. It's not enough, it will never be enough, but it's all I can do. So that's your penance, Natalie said softly. Not just carrying the guilt, but trying to provide for them. Forrest nodded. I don't deserve forgiveness, Natalie, but they deserve support. Have you ever visited them? Since it happened, he shook his head. Alina made it clear I wasn't welcome. Can't blame her. They sat in silence as full darkness descended, the only sound the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. Finally, Natalie spoke again. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Forrest looked at her, surprised. That's all you have to say? What would you have me say? That you're right to punish yourself forever? I don't believe that. Or that you should just forgive yourself and move on. I don't think it's that simple either. She met his gaze steadily. What I believe is that carrying guilt alone doesn't honor Manuel's memory or help his family. It just keeps you from living. Her words hit him with unexpected force. For years, He'd convinced himself that his nomadic existence was necessary, the only proper response to what he'd done. The idea that it might be another form of selfishness had never occurred to him. "I don't know how to live any other way anymore," he admitted. "Then learn," she said, rising from her chair. "Starting tomorrow, we have a horse sale to prepare for. After that, well, we'll see." She leaned down impulsively and pressed a kiss to his forehead, a gesture of comfort rather than passion. "Good night, Forrest. Sleep well." As she disappeared into the house, Forrest remained on the porch, his mind reeling. For the first time in 5 years, he had shared his burden, and the sky hadn't fallen. Natalie hadn't recoiled in horror or condemned him. Instead, she had listened, understood, and challenged him to consider a different path. Whether he could take that path remained to be seen. But for the first time, Forrest allowed himself to imagine the possibility. The days leading up to the horse sale were a flurry of activity. Each animal needed to be groomed to perfection, exercised appropriately, and given final training sessions to ensure they would show well. Natalie was everywhere at once, checking details, confirming arrangements, reviewing paperwork. If she was still grieving and Forrest knew, she channeled it into determined productivity. Forrest focused on preparing Flame, who had developed into a remarkable cutting horse under his guidance. The sorrel colt, once wary and defensive, now responded to the lightest touch, moving with fluid grace as he separated cattle from the herd in practice sessions. "He'll fetch top dollar," Edgar predicted as they watched Flame work. "Might even set a record for the ranch." "He's special," Forrest agreed, pride evident in his voice. "More heart than any horse I've trained." "Miss Natalie says you're to demonstrate him personally at the sale," Edgar continued. "Said nobody shows him off better." The news surprised Forrest. He had assumed he would work behind the scenes, not participate in the public event. "She did." "Yep. Said you two have some kind of connection." Edgar glanced at him slyly. "Horse and rider, that is." Forrest ignored the implication. "I'll make sure he performs his best." But later, when he found Natalie reviewing ledgers in the small office off the main house, he questioned her decision. "Are you sure you want me handling Flame at the sale? I'm not exactly the social type." She looked up, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I've noticed. But this isn't about socializing, it's about showing what he can do. Nobody does that better than you." "Your father intended him to be the cornerstone of your breeding program," Forrest pointed out. "Are you certain you want to sell him?" Natalie sighed, setting down her pencil. "No, I'm not certain of anything anymore, but the ranch needs capital, especially now. Father had debts I wasn't aware of until recently, medical expenses, mostly." This was news to Forrest. "How bad?" "Bad enough that selling Flame will solve the immediate problem," she said. "I can rebuild the breeding program later." Forrest frowned, thinking, what if there was another way? Flame could stand at stud, bring in fees that way. Eventually, yes, but we need money now, not a year from now. What about a partnership? Someone invests in the horse, shares in future stud fees, but you keep Flame here and manage his breeding career. Natalie looked intrigued. "That could work, but who would?" she broke off, studying his face. "Are you offering?" Forrest hadn't intended to, but as the words left his mouth, he realized he'd been considering the idea subconsciously. "I have savings," he said slowly. "Not a fortune, but enough to help. And I know horses, no bloodlines." "Why would you do this?" she asked, clearly puzzled. "You're just passing through, remember." The reminder of his standard phrase brought a wry smile to his lips. "Maybe I'm reconsidering my travel plans." Natalie's expression grew guarded. "Don't make offers you don't intend to keep, Forrest. Not now." "I mean it," he insisted, surprising himself with his certainty. "Since that night on the porch, I've been thinking about what you said about carrying guilt alone. about what your father asked of me, about. He hesitated, then finished, about what it might be like to stop running. Hope flickered in her eyes, but she tamped it down. And what conclusion did you reach? That I don't know if I can stay forever, he admitted honestly, but I want to try staying for now. The partnership would be a reason, a commitment. Natalie considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll discuss terms after the sale. For now, let's plan on showing Flame but not necessarily selling him. Agreed, Forrest said, feeling as if something important had just shifted between them, though he couldn't quite define what. The day of the horse sale dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for showcasing the ranch's stock. Buyers from as far as Denver and Cheyenne had arrived, along with local ranchers and horse traders. The atmosphere was festive despite the recent funeral, with Mrs. Wilkins and several hired women serving refreshments while the men discussed horseflesh with professional scrutiny. Forrest kept to the stables as much as possible, preparing the horses and avoiding small talk. Flame seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing patiently as Forrest groomed him to a copper shine, his coat gleaming in the morning light. "You're going to show them all what a real cutting horse looks like," Forrest murmured, running a brush over the colt's already immaculate coat. "Make your mistress proud." "He already does," Natalie's voice came from behind him. Forrest turned to find her dressed more formally than usual in a fitted riding habit of deep blue, her hair neatly arranged beneath a small hat. She looked every inch the confident ranch owner, though Forrest detected the tension beneath her composed exterior. "You look." He searched for an appropriate word that wouldn't reveal too much of his feelings. "Professional." A smile quirked at the corner of her mouth. High praise indeed from a man of so few words. She approached, stroking Flame's neck. "Is he ready?" "Born ready," Forrest confirmed. "When do you want us to demonstrate?" "After the initial viewing before the bidding starts. Around noon." She hesitated, then added, "There's a man here from the Crossland outfit in Colorado. Brought a lot of money and a lot of interest in Flame specifically." "The breeding partnership idea still stands," Forrest reminded her. "If you want it." Their eyes met over Flame's back. "I do," she said quietly. "But it has to make financial sense too, if the Crossland offer is high enough." "I understand," Forrest nodded, though a part of him was already dreading the thought of watching Flame leave with strangers. The colt had come to represent something important, a connection to this place, to Natalie, to the possibility of staying. The morning passed quickly as buyers inspected the horses, asking questions about bloodlines and training. Natalie handled the business aspects smoothly, while Edgar and the other hands demonstrated various horses' gaits and responsiveness. Forrest stayed with Flame, keeping him calm amid the unusual activity. At noon, Natalie called for everyone's attention, announcing that a special demonstration would now take place. Forrest led Flame to the main corral, where several cattle had been placed for the cutting demonstration. As they entered the ring, a murmur ran through the crowd, appreciation for the magnificent horse and curiosity about the quiet man handling him. Forrest mounted with fluid grace, settling into the saddle as if he and the horse were one entity. He gave Natalie a nod, then guided Flame toward the small herd with the lightest pressure of his legs. What followed was a dance of precision and intuition. Flame moved with liquid speed, separating one cow from the group, blocking its attempts to rejoin the herd with uncanny anticipation. Horse and rider seemed to communicate without visible signals, each movement flowing naturally into the next. When they had successfully cut 3 different animals, demonstrating Flame's consistency and style, Forrest brought him to a collected stop in the center of the ring and dismounted. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Forrest, uncomfortable with the attention, focused on praising Flame, rubbing the colt's forehead as Natalie approached. "That was exceptional," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Father would have been proud." Before Forrest could respond, they were surrounded by potential buyers eager to discuss Flame's performance and breeding. The man from Norton Ranch was particularly persistent, a tall, well-dressed individual named Harrington, who spoke with the confidence of substantial financial backing. "Name your price, Miss Norton," he said after several minutes of praising the horse. "My employer has authorized me to pay whatever is necessary to acquire this animal." Natalie maintained her professional demeanor. "Bidding will start at $500, Mr. Harrington. Everyone will have an equal opportunity." The man smiled thinly. "Of course, but perhaps we could discuss a private sale, to save time and ensure you receive full value." "The auction begins in 30 minutes, she replied firmly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare." As she walked away, Harrington turned his attention to Forrest. "That was impressive handling, Mr. Valero," Forrest supplied reluctantly. "You have a rare touch with horses, Mr. Valero. Norton Ranch could use someone with your skills. The pay would be substantial." The offer took Forrest by surprise. "I'm employed here." "For now," Harrington said smoothly. "But surely a man of your talents is looking toward the future. Crossland is expanding, investing heavily in quality bloodstock. It's an opportunity to be part of something significant." Forrest's instinct was to refuse outright, but a lifetime of caution made him simply nod. "I'll consider it." "Do that." Harrington handed him a card. "My employer values loyalty, Mr. Valero, rewards it generously." As the man walked away, Forrest felt a flicker of unease. The interaction reminded him of conversations with Blackburn years ago, the same assumption that everything and everyone had a price, the same veiled implications about loyalty. He tucked the card into his pocket without looking at it, focusing instead on returning Flame to the stable for a well-deserved rest before the auction. The colt had performed perfectly. Whatever happened next was out of his control. The auction proceeded smoothly, with most horses fetching good if not exceptional prices. Natalie maintained her composure throughout, though Forrest could see the strain in the set of her shoulders as each sale brought them closer to Flame's turn. When the sorrel colt was finally led into the ring, a hush fell over the crowd. Natalie described his bloodlines and training succinctly, then opened the bidding at the promised $500. Immediately, multiple hands went up. The price jumped quickly to $700, then $800, with several buyers dropping out. By $900, only Harrington and 2 others remained. At $1,000 already, a record for the ranch, one more buyer withdrew. The final duel was between Harrington and a weathered rancher from Wyoming whom Forrest didn't recognize. The price climbed steadily until it reached $1,500, an astronomical sum for a single horse, no matter how exceptional. $1,550, the Wyoming rancher called, his voice showing strain. Harrington smiled confidently. $1,600. A murmur ran through the crowd. The Wyoming man hesitated, then shook his head reluctantly, conceding defeat. $1,600 once, Natalie called, her voice steady despite the momentous bid. $1,600 twice. $1,700. A new voice rang out. Heads turned in surprise. Forrest stood at the edge of the ring, his expression determined. $1,700 for a half interest in the horse, with breeding rights to remain with Norton Ranch. Natalie's composure slipped for the first time, shock evident on her face. Harrington looked equally startled, then angry. "This is irregular, Miss Norton," he protested. The horse was offered for outright sale. Natalie recovered quickly, her business acumen taking over. Mr. Valero's offer is essentially $1,700 for a half share, valuing the horse at $3,400 total, more than double your bid, Mr. Harrington. As the seller, I have the right to accept the most advantageous offer. My employer won't be pleased, Harrington warned. $1,750 for full ownership. $1,800 for half, Forrest countered immediately. The crowd watched with rapt attention as the unusual bidding war continued. When it reached $2,000 for a half share, effectively valuing Flame at $4,000 total, Harrington finally conceded with obvious displeasure. $2,000 once, twice, sold to Mr. Valero for a half interest in Flame, Natalie announced, bringing down her gavel with a decisive tap. The auction continued with the remaining horses, but an electric current seemed to run through the gathering. By the time the last animal was sold, rumors were already circulating about the unprecedented partnership and what it might mean. Forrest avoided the post-auction socializing, retreating to check on Flame instead. The colt greeted him with a soft nickering, nosing at his pockets for treats. "You did well today, partner," Forrest murmured, offering a slice of apple he'd saved. "Earned yourself a home and made history in the process." "Yes, he did," Natalie's voice came from the stable doorway. "With a little help." She entered, closing the door behind her to shut out the noise of departing buyers and their purchases. In the dim light of the stable, her eyes were shadowed, unreadable. $2,000 is a lot of money, she said quietly. "He's worth it," Forrest replied, "and the ranch needs it." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." She moved closer. "Where did you get that kind of money, Forrest? And why would you spend it all on half a horse?" He hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "I've saved most of my wages for 5 years. Sent some to Alina and Miguel, but kept the rest, moving it from bank to bank as I traveled. Never spent much on myself. As for why?" He met her gaze directly. "It's not just about the horse, Natalie." "Then what is it about?" "Commitment," he said simply. "To the horse, to the ranch, to me," she finished when he faltered. Forrest nodded, unable to find the right words to express the tumult of his feelings. For so long, he had focused on atonement, on punishment, on the past. But somehow, this woman and this place had awakened something he thought long dead: hope for a future. Natalie stepped closer still, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes, smell the light floral scent of her hair. "Forrest," she said softly, "do you remember what I said that day with the mare and foal? About your burdens?" He remembered perfectly. "You said I should share them." "I said more than that," she corrected gently. "I said, then let me carry half." The echo of her words struck him powerfully, like our partnership with Flame. "Exactly like that," she agreed. "I'm not asking you to forget your past or ignore your responsibilities. I'm asking you to let me help carry them, just as you're helping me carry mine. Your burdens are the ranch, the legacy your father left," Forrest said, trying to understand. "Yes, and the loneliness of doing it alone." Her honesty was disarming. "Father worried about that, you know, not because he didn't think I was capable, but because he understood that some loads are too heavy for one person." Forrest felt something shift within him, a realization dawning. "All this time I thought carrying my guilt alone was the right thing to do, the honorable thing. And now I wonder if it was just another form of pride," he admitted. "Thinking I had to handle everything myself, that I didn't deserve help or happiness." The word felt strange on his lips, a concept so long abandoned that speaking it seemed almost sacrilegious. Yet here it was, a possibility he could almost touch. Natalie reached out, her hand finding his. "I can't promise that sharing your burden will make it lighter immediately. Guilt and grief don't work that way, but I can promise you won't face it alone anymore." Forrest looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face open, honest, offering not just comfort but partnership. He had been running for so long, convinced that solitude was his fate, his punishment. The idea of stopping, of accepting help, of building something lasting it terrified and attracted him in equal measure. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he said finally. "I've been broken for a long time." "I'm not asking for perfection," she replied. "Just willingness to try, together." In that moment, with Flame watching curiously and the sounds of the ranch continuing around them, Forrest made his decision. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Her response was immediate and certain, her arms sliding around his neck as she returned the kiss with a warmth that melted the last of his resistance. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Forrest felt as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders, not gone completely, but lighter, more manageable. "Stay," Natalie whispered. "Not just for now, but for good. Build something here with me." "I will," he promised, the words feeling right in a way he hadn't expected. "But there's something I need to do first." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Elena and Miguel," Forrest nodded. "I need to see them, talk to them face to face. Not just to keep sending money from a distance, but to truly face what happened, to ask forgiveness even if it's not given." "Then go," she said without hesitation. "Do what you need to do and come back to me." "I will," he repeated, the promise more solemn than any vow he'd ever made. "I'll come back." 2 months later, Forrest rode back into Fort Collins on a crisp autumn day, Thunder's hooves kicking up swirls of fallen leaves. The trip to Texas had been long and emotionally exhausting, but necessary in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. Elena had been wary at first, then angry, finally dissolving into tears as years of grief found release. Miguel, now 17, had been more difficult, harboring a young man's righteous anger at the person he blamed for his father's death. But gradually, over days of difficult conversations, something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a beginning, an acknowledgement that the past couldn't be changed, but the future might still hold possibilities. Forrest had left them with more money, but more importantly, with a promise to remain in their lives, to support Miguel's education, to honor Manuel's memory through action rather than self-punishment. He had also, to his surprise, found himself sharing stories of Norton Ranch, of Flame, of Natalie, painting a picture of the life he hoped to build. Now, as he approached the ranch, anxiety and anticipation warred within him. What if she had changed her mind? What if the feelings that had blossomed between them had withered in his absence? His fears proved groundless. As he rode up the familiar lane, Natalie emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of hooves. For a moment, she stood absolutely still, then broke into a run, her skirts gathered in her hands as she raced to meet him. Forrest dismounted just in time to catch her as she flung herself into his arms, her face alight with joy. "You came back," she breathed. "I promised I would," he reminded her, holding her tightly, savoring the feel of her in his arms after so many lonely nights on the trail. "How was it?" she asked, drawing back enough to study his face. "How are they?" "It was hard," he admitted, "but necessary. We really talked. There's healing to be done still, but it's begun." She touched his cheek gently. "And you, how are you?" Forrest considered the question carefully. "Lighter," he said finally. "Not free of guilt, not completely, but lighter. Like I can breathe again." "Good," she said simply. "Because there's a lot of work to be done here, and I need a partner who can keep up." He smiled, truly smiled for what felt like the first time in years. "I think I can manage that." Hand in hand, they walked toward the house, their house now, in a way it hadn't been before. Flame watched from a nearby corral, his coat gleaming copper in the autumn light, a living symbol of their partnership. As they reached the porch, Forrest paused, turning to face Natalie. "I love you," he said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "I think I have since that night with the mare and foal, maybe even before, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." "I know," she replied, her eyes warm with understanding. "And I love you too, the real you, not some perfect version without scars or regrets. I love the man who gentles horses with infinite patience, who carries his burdens with dignity, who was brave enough to face his past and come back to build a future." Forrest drew her close again, overwhelmed by the gift of her love and acceptance. "I don't know if I deserve this second chance," he murmured against her hair. "Maybe none of us deserve the good things that come to us," she said wisely. "But we can choose to accept them with gratitude and make something worthwhile of them." He kissed her then, a promise more binding than any words. As the sun set over Norton Ranch, their ranch now, Forrest Valero finally understood what it meant to come home. In the years that followed, the legend of Flame and his offspring spread throughout the West. Norton Valero horses became known for their intelligence, heart, and gentle disposition qualities that reflected the partnership that produced them. Forrest and Natalie worked side by side, building on Harold's legacy while creating their own. They were married the following spring, a simple ceremony attended by friends, neighbors, and, to Forrest's surprise and gratitude, Miguel Diaz, who made the journey from Texas to stand as his witness. The young man was reserved but cordial, the beginnings of acceptance if not yet full forgiveness. Their first child, a daughter they named Hannah, arrived a year later, followed by twin sons who kept the ranch lively with their energy and mischief. Forrest proved to be a patient, loving father, determined to create for his children the stable home he had lost, and then found again. The guilt never disappeared entirely, such things rarely do, but it transformed over time from a crushing weight to a quiet reminder of lessons learned at great cost. On difficult days, when memories pressed too close, Natalie would find him in the stables with Flame, the two aging together with dignity. "Heavy thoughts today?" she would ask, coming to stand beside him. "Some," he would admit, never hiding from her. And without fail, she would take his hand, her grip strong and sure after decades of ranch work, and remind him, "Then let me carry half." And he would let her, just as he carried half of her burdens in return, the perfect balance of a partnership built on truth, forgiveness, and the courage to stop running and start living.